In Daniel chapter 3, this is going to set Daniel up for a whole bunch of heartache here. But nevertheless, it's the way politics is, and politics is politics, regardless of which age or government or nation it's in. And when you give a little man power, what happens? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Basically, the old phrase, or you give a little man a little power, you create a huge problem. And that is often the case in every situation, including pastors. So that's why don't ever give me power. You can't, anyway, I'm already married to Her Highness. Take my stick on the last dang game. Sat there all night, won nothing. She takes it and wins. This will not be forgotten. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made a great image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits. Now, a cubit, folks, was about 2.5 feet. It's from your elbow to the tip of your center finger. That is 1 cubit. So if you're ever wondering how much that is. So if you got 60 of those, you got about 120, 130 feet, give or take a few feet. Okay, so it's a big statue. 130 feet is, I don't know, what is 130 feet? That's about 10 stories. 10 feet is 12 stories. It's a big statue. You know, it's not a little thing you put on the shelf. We're talking about a massive 12-story statue here. So he made a statue of gold to the height of 60 cubits and a width of 6 cubits. So it was a big old statue. And he set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. The plain of Dura was kind of a high place that overlooked everything else. They used it mostly for military movements and stuff like that because they could keep an eye on their enemies and all that stuff. And Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to the assemblage of the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the counselors and the treasurers and the judges and the magistrates and all the women who took their husband's last stick on the 10th game and all the rulers of the province to come to the dedication of that image of Nebuchadnezzar that the king had set up. So the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the counselors and the treasurers and the judges and the magistrates and the rulers and that lady that took my stick dedicated the image of Nebuchadnezzar that he had set up, and they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had stood up. And then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is now given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horns, the flute, the lyres, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipes, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image of Nebuchadnezzar that the king has set up. But whosoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, at the time when all the people heard the sound of, all that stuff, and all kinds of music, all the peoples and the nations and the men of every language fell down, and they worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. For this reason, at the time certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against those who were Jews. And they responded and they said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, "O king, live forever. You yourself, O king, has made the decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. But whosoever does not fall down and worship the golden image shall be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire." Y'all got this down yet? Okay, just checking. "Now there are certain Jews whom you have appointed," nice call there, "over the administration of the province of Babylon, named Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these men, O king, have disregarded your command. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up." So Nebuchadnezzar went into a rage and in anger gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar responded to them and said, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image which I have set up?" Now, if you are ready at the moment, you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the dirge, and the psaltery, the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you will fall down and worship the image which I have made very well. But if you will not worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? Now, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is well able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar was then filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He answered by giving the orders to heat the furnace 7 times hotter than it usually was heated. And he commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his armies to tie Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego up in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers. Wow, there's a southern term. Must have been the southern part of Babylon. Tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and other clothes, and they were cast into the midst of the furnace blazing fire. And for this reason, because the king's command was so urgent and the furnace had been made so extremely hot, the flames of the fire came up and slew the men who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the blazing fire, and they were still tied up. Excuse me. Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste, and he responded and said to his high officials, were there not 3 men that we cast bound into the midst of the fire? And the answer they said to the king, certainly, O king. And he answered and said, look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about, and the 4th that looks as the appearance of the son of a god. Excuse me. And Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of the blazing fire, and he responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, and the servants of the most God high, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire, and the satraps and the prefects and the governors and the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on their bodies of these men, and not even the hair of their head was singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor did they even smell of fire. It did not come upon them. And Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angels and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command and yielding up their own bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a new decree that people and nations and tongue that speaks any offense against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to rubble in a heap, inasmuch as that there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper throughout the province of Babylon. Whew. I'm tired. What do you think about that? Y'all think about it for 1 second. Oh my gosh. All right, sorry. I was tempted and I fell victim to my sin this morning. Somebody put little mini Heath bars in the candy jar. That was me, actually. And I ate one, and it's coming back to get me.
Listen to your mama. Listen to your mama.
My mama's the one that made me go buy them. She's sitting right behind you.
I mean your wife.
Get those. I told her I saw them in the store. She goes, and you didn't buy them? I went back and got them. Keep mama happy. And now I'm paying the price for my sin. See, the sins of the mothers are visited upon the children. What do you think about this? Feelings, impressions, thoughts?
I think it's a testament to faith. Wow.
Well, it is without question. But, you know, when you think about it, how did this all come about? It's not like God was involved. God was kind of dragged into it. You know, you got Babylon, and you think about Babylon. Now, this is not the first time God's done this. You know, the 10 plagues, y'all know that, in Egypt, all that stuff. The 10 plagues were not just, you know, God getting creative with nature and wasting everybody. He actually was destroying the 10 gods of Egypt, is what he was doing. I mean, all those things, the sky darkening, well, that kind of takes out the sun god, you know, Ra. And the death of the firstborn, that was the other great god they had, the god of the underworld, whatever his name was. I don't remember them all now, but each and every one of those plagues represented another god of the Egyptian pantheon. And they had 10 major ones, and the Lord basically wasted each one with the subsequent plague until finally they got down to the life itself. And of course, Pharaoh said, well, I'll kill all you guys if you don't. And he goes, well, you've just named the last plague. And then the whole Passover thing and the angel of death and all that stuff. He didn't just destroy the Egyptians or their economy or their produce or their ability to survive. He destroyed their gods. This is what our God did, what Yahweh did. Well, he's doing the same thing here in Babylon. Why? Well, Babylon's got a whole bunch of gods. And one of which was Nebuchadnezzar. He wasn't as arrogant about it as, say, maybe the Caesars were. They were a little bit more arrogant about that man-God thing, you know, I'm the Lord. But nevertheless, so what does Nebuchadnezzar do? I'm not going to spell that. We'll just call him Neb. He sets up a statue for himself. God didn't set up a statue. The people didn't set up a statue. He set up a statue. And remember, here's Neb. Nice guy. We'll put him about 6'3", 6'9" with a crown. And he built a statue of himself that's this high. You know, 10, 12 stories. And he put it on the plain of Dura, which was the highest point in Babylon, so that no matter where you were in the entire province, even out in the Persian Gulf on a boat, you could see it. And the fact that it was all gold, first of all, shows his opulence. U-L-A-N-C-E. The fact that it was all gold was his arrogance. You know, how many other statues did you see of all gold that were 12 stories high in that day and age? I mean, think about it, and it was all about him. There is nothing been like this before. Nothing would ever really happen like, well, it would happen again in Ephesus. But the point is, look at this statue on the plain of Dura, a high place set up, and then the decree that when you hear the music of the flute and the tambourine and the trajan and the psaltery and everything else, that you would bow down before this statue and you would worship this statue. I'm not sure what their definition of worship was, but it basically was, you don't matter. God does, and the God is Nebuchadnezzar. And that was for not just his nation, but for all men, all peoples, anybody in the region, slave or free. I don't care if you're a sailor out on a boat. I don't care if you're the guy at the Chick-fil-A drive-thru. Whoever you are, wherever you are, even if you're in surgery, I guess, I don't know, you bow down and worship when you hear this music and all that going on. Who did that? Nebuchadnezzar did. Nobody forced him. He didn't really consult with anybody. He simply did it and then called all of his important guys and said, spread the word. This is what we're going to do from now on. Why? Well, because I am the king of the world. And there is no entity greater or stronger or better or bigger or richer or cooler than me. Therefore, you will obey. And then he developed his own judgment. What is he going to do? Well, we got this furnace over here, and it's going to be blazing with fire. And if you don't obey, you're going into it. That's a pretty stiff punishment, when you think about it, for most people, to go into a furnace. In fact, of all the ways to die, fire is probably the most feared. We all say, well, I don't mind getting crushed by a steamroller or falling out of an airplane. But to die by fire, why? Well, because usually it's not immediate. It takes a little while. And it's extraordinarily painful because it's affecting every single nerve in your body at the same time. It's a horrible way to die. This is probably part of the thinking behind the whole hell thing. Eternal death by fire. Well, why not? If you're a god, you have a paradise for those who will obey, and you have a hell for those who won't. Now, question. Did Nebuchadnezzar, I don't have my coffee yet, did Nebuchadnezzar have the authority to do all that? Sure, he did.
Technically, he was the king.
He was the king. He had the authority. He can do it. Yes, I can do this. I can order it. I can build it. I can make it. And I can decree it, which he did. Now, all of his satraps and governors and all them provincial guys, governors and everything, they all came around and they all said, sure, yeah, that's great, yeah, great. Do it. Until they found 3 guys, which were servants from Israel, who in the first day there said, I'm not going to eat your stuff. I'm not going to do your stuff. I'm going to eat what our God tells us to eat. When the purpose was to get rid of everything Hebrew, these 3 kids, and Daniel too as well, and I throw Ezekiel in that same bunch, they hung on to what they knew about their real God, not this guy trying to be God. Now the consequence, of course, was real, and it was effective immediately. How many of us could go through that? What did they say? Well, we think our God can protect us from that. But even if he doesn't, we're still his boys.
Yeah.
So even if he doesn't, know this, O king. I like that verse. Know this, O king. We will not worship you. We will not worship your gods. We will not worship anything of Babylon. We will worship the one true God, that is Yahweh. How many times through the scripture have you heard that about I am the one true God, there are no other gods? Only the ones men create in their minds. And usually they create them after something that is earthly. Do you know why God never appears to anybody in the Old Testament? Because God says, if you saw me in my fullness, your head would explode. Your little avocado head up here, just, you couldn't handle it. Now, I don't know what that means, but it was said throughout Scripture, no one can view the Lord lest you die. Even Moses had to shield his eyes many times and stuff like that so he wouldn't look upon whatever it was God was doing at the time.
And apparently from reading with Moses that God produces just massive amounts of radiation. It says when he comes off the mountain, his face was radiant.
Oh, yeah.
Burned from
Like going sticking yourself in a microwave. Charlton Heston did that real well in the 10 years. His hair was all white. Same thing happens to me when they do that AED thing. I look like a Muppet. Throughout the scriptures, God says one thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again, and that is, there are no other gods, just so you know. Well, that has never stopped man from creating them, have they? We go all the way back to the beginning of creation. Men were creating gods, creating gods, creating gods. So God would evidence himself over and over and over again in massive ways, in private ways. Moses was all alone on top of a mountain, and what did he find? He found a little bush burning, but it wasn't being consumed. Now that's not normal. I don't think any of us would walk past that and say, oh yeah, another bush burning, but not burning. We would all, like Moses, turn aside to see what's going on here. That's a very private audience. One guy on a barren mountain in the middle. Why is one bush growing up there in the first place? On the other hand, you got Noah, who's building an aircraft carrier in the middle of the desert, saying that the one true God is going to come and flood this whole place, and all of you are going to get wasted. Now, that thing wasn't a weekend kind of job. It took 78, 79 years to build that thing. Enough time? KD, I'm going to have a party in 78 years from now, but I want you to put it on your calendar, okay? So in the year 20, whatever it is, 63, I want you to come to my house at 7 o'clock and we're going to have dinner. Now, are you going to forget that?
I'll be dead.
Oh, no, you won't, mister. So Carol says to me every day, you drink that smoothie. I don't want to. It'll keep you alive. I don't want to. Oh, no, you won't, mister. You'll drink that smoothie. She threatens me with life. Anyway, throughout the scripture, God makes himself known amidst the many gods that we keep giving attention to and adhering. Another public was, of course, Egypt. How could you not notice that? Throughout scripture, think about it. Noah's Ark, Egypt, Moses, the whole 9 yards. Eat the Judges, for crying out loud. Have you ever read that book? Every time the people went off to worship other things, to get involved in other things. Oh, I remember that verse there. Each one did what was right in his own eyes. Remember that? 12 times they got him in trouble. And God had to raise up somebody to get them out of trouble. Over and over and over again. Let's go ahead a few thousand years. We get up to the Romans. What did the Romans do? Romans were very creative people. They were businessmen. Army was like a business. Society was like a business. Agriculture was like a business. Everything was like a business. They built a great empire. They built roads. They built cities. They built governments, for crying out loud, because that's who they were. And when it came to gods, what did they do? They weren't sure how to build gods, so what they did is they took all the Greek gods and renamed them. How convenient was that? So Poseidon became Neptune. You get it? That's our god of the sea. And this guy became that guy, and Zeus became Juno, and all this stuff. Huh? Jupiter, yeah, Jupiter. Juno was the god of war or whatever. Anyway, they just took those guys and renamed them. So they're very businesslike. Boom, we got our gods in place, let's go. And of course Caesar said, well, you gotta include me here, pal. In fact, Jesus takes him to Caesarea Philippi, and what do we see there? We see this temple built by Philip with all the gods in there, except the biggest portico was Caesar. And then there was Jupiter and Athena and all them other ones. And Jesus took his boys there and says, who do you say I am? Who do you think I am? And Peter finally got one of the answers right. He said, I think you're the Son of the living God. And Jesus said, blessed are you, Peter, because flesh and blood didn't tell you this. You didn't create me in your own mind. You saw what God did. You saw how God presented himself in me. And you came to the conclusion that God is amongst us here and working. A God who is rivaled by no others. Not this guy, not the Greek pantheon, not the Egyptian pantheon, not the Roman pantheon, but God, the Son of the living God. Well, when we started the study of Jonah, I asked you a question. The question was, are those Ninevites subject to our God, subject to the one true God, if you believe there is a one true God, who has presented himself by his choice, not ours, to this group of Hebrews, and has carried on his promise with those Hebrews since mankind began. If this one true God does exist, and if this one true God chose the Hebrews as his people to where he would present himself to this world, does that mean that the Ninevites over here are responsible to the one true God? Not Nebuchadnezzar, just the one true God. Well, Nebuchadnezzar was doing the same thing. There is nobody greater than me. And believing that in himself, like the Caesars, they acted upon it and did ridiculous things. And people had to become subject to the will of man, not the will of the one true God, who has believed and presented himself throughout the scriptures, throughout history. Let's say history. Okay? Now the question is, we have a choice, don't we? We have a choice of the Lord, the one true God, or we have the world and all the little godettes that they make. Jesus was quite plain about this. There are two masters that you will serve, one way or another. You will serve the one true God and be loyal and faithful and subject to him, or you will serve whatever God you can find in this earth. But it is, know this, it is of this world. And Jesus says, as the presentation of God, that all of these are not true, and they are quickly passing away. Can we get to the point in our lives where, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, can say, you know what, I don't know if my God will deliver me from this or not. I think he can. Whether he does or not, never was my choice in the first place. But so you will know, O king, when it comes to gods, you ain't it. And I will not serve a false god. I will not worship a false god. And if you want to throw me into this fire, you know, you got the soldiers to do that. I won't be able to stop you, but I won't worship you as a god. I believe in the one true God. This is where Jesus would say, go your way, your faith has made you well. You with leprosy, and you with leprosy, and you with leprosy. You're all damned as much as these 3 kids thrown in the furnace. It's a little slower, but it's still a very painful and horrific death. Jesus would say at this point, go and be well. Your faith has made you well. God's not doing anything in the Old Testament that Jesus did not do in the New Testament. Just different ways, different places, different cultures, different people, different circumstance, but the same good old message, I am the Lord thy God. You shall have no other gods before me. Why? Because there are no other gods to put before me except those who you create in your mind. And men have lived and died and bowed down to all these false gods forever and ever and ever. And with each successive generation, when the Lord presents himself, he says, you guys are backing the wrong horse. The culmination of this is Revelation, when heaven and earth passes away. This world is dying. We are dying. The only way off this ticket is through the hand of God. This is what Jesus meant when he said, by no other way will you come to the Lord, except by the way of the Lord.
Was this, is there any way to know when this happened as far as when they were taking slaves into Babylon? Was it immediate or was it somewhere in 10 years? Anybody know?
They would be in captivity. The traditional time frame on this from, well, I don't have my map, but traditional time frame of the captivity is 70 years.
Right.
However, you got to remember, it took a year or two probably to get back to Babylon.
Yeah.
It took a few years to train these kids and get them talking Babylon and all that stuff. So they would be there for a while. Then it would take a couple of years to get them back to Jerusalem. And then they wouldn't really end the captivity until the walls were rebuilt around Jerusalem and the temple dedicated. And we're thinking around 414, somewhere in there, that happened. That was the official end of the captivity. But the question, were they in Babylon for 70 years? That would have been probably 2 generations in that day and age. Probably not. But they were probably there a good 50 years, you know, or more. I don't know, more or less, give or take a few years.
Well, given the fact of how people are and how they were, you know, even further back in Egypt, you know, every time something didn't suit them just right, you know,
Right.
we've got them on and grown about it. So when they get over here and now they're captive by their own destruction, they were
Right.
probably here and, you know, all this occurs and they're probably sitting around going, as people are, God is dead, God doesn't care about us
Most of them
anymore.
probably were.
Doesn't exist, and this right here.
Well, you know, when you think about it, really think about it, the Hebrews were enslaved in Egypt. And to be quite frank, at least initially under the reign of Joseph and his Pharaoh and all that, life wasn't too bad. They lived in the land of Goshen, which is land out in the delta of the Nile River, well watered, very fertile because all the nutrients came down the river. And they lived in a good land. They grew a lot of stuff. It wasn't bad for a long time. In fact, God blessed them. And they prospered, and there became a whole lot of them. They were, you know, doing the Hebrew fertility dance or something. And it wasn't until a couple of pharaohs later that the new pharaoh said, you know, there's more Jews than there are Egyptians in this country. That's a problem. They could rise up and take us over at any time. He was the one who started inciting the rules, saying, you guys are going to be slaves, you're going to make bricks, you're not getting any food anymore, you're not getting anything anymore. He armed all his men, made soldiers and taskmasters everywhere, and you're going to make bricks, and you're going to be slaves, and you're going to be this and that. And all male children will be put to the sword. All male children. Genocide. No more Hebrews without male children. So he killed all the male children except for one, Miriam, who put her baby in a basket, floated him downriver. Okay, he made it. He was Moses, and we know the rest of that story. God's presenting himself in a very horrible situation. And yet those people who had it good for a long time became grumblers and mean, ugly, nasty, who is this, who's that? Even Moses said, if I go back there, first of all, the Egyptians are going to kill me. Second of all, the Hebrews are going to hate me because I, lied. I grew up an Egyptian when I wasn't. I was a Hebrew and I didn't take care of them. And now I've been run out of Egypt and they're not going to listen to me. Who should I say is sending me? You're sending me to a people who hates me. You're sending me to a nation that hates me. Kind of like the situation of Paul. Christians didn't trust him. Jews hated him for leaving the priesthood. Kind of like Matthew, the tax collector. Hebrews hated him for taking taxes. Rome didn't trust him because he was a sleazy little nasty guy. So God's taking the worst of the worst and saying to him, tell him I'm sending you. Who? Me. I am who I am, the one true God. All the rest are nonsense. Well, they're not going to like that very much, are they? Oh, they're going to hate it. Remember now, the people came out of Egypt, and what did they do? They grumbled, and they fussed, and they were miserable. Well, we hate this lousy food. Hate's a pretty strong word. Those biscuits aren't bad every morning. I'm tired of going out and getting the biscuits every morning. I'm tired of eating biscuits. You know how many times you can eat biscuits? A southern man could eat them every morning. He doesn't care. It was sad they were northern Jews. Had they been the southern Jews, Moses wouldn't have had a problem. The point is, they were grumbling even though God was right there. God worked two of the huge things ever. They saw it with their own eyes, and they came out and they're fussing about biscuits. And God finally said, oh, that's it, you monkeys. 40 years in the desert, and you know what? You're getting nothing but biscuits. He didn't kill them all, but they weren't going into the land of milk and honey either. Why? Well, they were grumbling and fussing, and where's God? And it's too hot, and it's too cold, and then we don't have any water. And what about meat? We haven't had meat in days and months and years. So God would send quail over the desert. How many quail live in the desert? Think about that for a moment. See, a good southern man knows quail are in the brush, in the meadow. They're not in the desert, so they wouldn't have traveled 40 years in the desert. Southern guys would have said, let's go this way. I think there's quail out there. The point is that God presents himself to every generation, just as Jesus said. This whole world will exist until what? Till the gospel is preached to every nation, every person. Till God gets a chance to present himself to everybody so that nobody is without excuse. And this is what happens throughout the Old Testament. This with Nebuchadnezzar is no different. So these three boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, says, so you will know, O king, you ain't God. Go ahead and throw us into the furnace. Of course, he got all angry. I like the thing in his face became distorted. Oh, wow. I think my wife must be a queen or something, because I've seen that face before. When I do something stupid, oh no, I've got a fiery furnace in my future. So you will know, O king, that you ain't God. Now, whether my God decides to save us or not, I can't decide. I can't make that decision for him. That's a decision only he can make. But I'm going to believe he can. And if you want to throw me in the fire, well, as a good southern boy would say, have at it. They tied him up, got the thing 7 times hotter. I like that 7 in there, God, man, together. So. And they opened it up and threw him in, and then the fire came out and killed all the guards and threw him in. Well, we did that wrong. Somebody got the instructions on how to throw people in the furnace? And the king looks in there. Now, who puts a window in the furnace? And so,
Knowing the cultures from over there, from being over there, they kind of consider execution quality entertainment.
oh
So
yeah.
they probably wanted to watch.
Didn't we throw 3 guys in there? Well, there's 4 in there walking around, and they're telling jokes and stuff. They're having fun. Open it up and bring these guys out. And they came out. Not, of course, they're fine. They're perfect. Don't even smell of smoke. Their hair is not singed. You would have a hard time telling that on me because I'm a very hairless individual. But nevertheless, everything about them said, there is a God, and it ain't you. Well, Neb does a quick turnaround. He says, tell all the peoples, all the kings, all the principalities, all the languages, all the everybody, everywhere, even the sheep and the goats and the animals, that anybody makes fun of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God, they're going in the furnace. Well, did Nebuchadnezzar learn his lesson? You know, the people in Egypt saw all those guys. That's why I was telling you that, or reminding you of that. And they came out, and what did they do? They disbelieved God. We're tired of biscuits. We need more water. We need this. We need that. We need that. And they made a golden cow. Not the brightest bulb in the lamp, are they? They went back to what they know the best. The Egyptians made gods. We can make them. And they'll be with us, and we'll control them, and we'll make sure they're always with us. And the Lord said, you guys, do your mothers know you're this stupid? After all I've done to present myself to you, miracle after miracle, and you're going back to a golden cow. You will never enter my promised land. Let's reverse that. That was people who were in captivity set free. These are people who are free now in captivity. What are they doing? Kids, children, taken to a foreign land, taught foreign languages, foreign customs, foreign everything, and they're saying, I'm not going to eat the king's choice food. I'm not going to drink the king's choice wines. I'm going to eat my own food that mom taught me growing up. I'm going to worship my own God. No, you will worship the golden statue 12 stories high in the middle of a giant plain. And when you hear the commotion going on, you bow down. You can't do that. There's only one true God. I don't know if you guys know this, but Neb, you ain't it. Well, I'll throw you in the furnace. Can your God save you from that? I don't know. I think he can easily. Now, whether he will or not, that's up to him. But I am not, so you will know, I am not worshiping your statue or you or your cultures or any other gods you got, because I know there's one true God. From the beginning of scriptures, I am the Lord thy God. There are no other gods. If it were not so, I would not have told you. To Jesus Christ, there is no other way to the Father except by the way the Father has given you. That is Jesus the Christ. The way, the truth, the life. I am the way. I am true. And I bring life at the end of it. All the way to Revelation, has it not been said that the Lord God was, is, and will forever be? No beginning, no end. The Lord our God does not change. Ever. Just one. Oh yeah? Prove it. That was Thomas. God, why did my mom name me Thomas? He got right up in the boy's face and said, well, unless I stick my finger in the bullet hole in his hands, unless I stick my hand up into his chest cavity and squeeze something. Tom, you're just weird. But he held to it. I ain't believing. Must have been from Missouri. Not really southern. Not really southern people there. Just weirdos that say, oh yeah, show me. I'd like to show you something. And Jesus showed up, didn't even talk to the other guys. Didn't even say, hey fellas, how's it going? Hey, peace be with you. Hey, let not your heart be troubled. No, he showed up, boom, in the upper room 2 days later or whatever, and said, Thomas, come here. Uh-oh. I bet John and Peter were going, this will be good. I would have if I were there. This ought to be good. Put your hand here. Put your hand here. Ew. Thomas falls down and worships. Well, you know, as sacred as that moment was, God's done that to every generation on this planet. I am here. I am here. Every generation. No generation can say, I didn't know. Yes, you did know, you just didn't care. That's the difference. See, the guys that came out of Egypt saw everything you could possibly show somebody, but they blew God off. These guys, they lived in God's promised land, were taken away as children, retrained, retraining camps or whatever, and still they hung on to what they believed. We got one God, and He wants us to do this, this, and this, and this, and this, and you ain't part of that. So yeah, you can throw us in the furnace. I fully believe our God can save us. Whether He does or not, it's up to Him. But one thing you will know, we will not worship your gods. Fire away. And they did. To another whole generation in captivity, these three boys proved that God was still with them. You don't think the other Jews heard about that? I guarantee you the other Jews heard about that. God is still here like He promised. Still loves us like He promised. And still presents Himself to us and everyone else. Now the ball's in your court. What are you going to do with it? To every generation, Jesus said. To every generation. Come with us, Paul. You're causing too much trouble. Where are we going? Well, we're going to cut your head off. What do you got to say about that? Good. For me to live will be Christ, but if I die, it's gain. Could God save Paul? Sure He could. Did God save Paul? He did. But not on this earth. Off went his head. Paul went to get the golden ground he spoke of so often. And then Peter was next in line. And one by one, all 12 of those men went to their fiery furnace, except John. They all went to their fiery furnace saying the same thing. You know what? You can kill me all you want. And God could save me whether He does or not. That's His call. But so you will know there is no other God but Jesus, my Lord and Savior. Dietrich Bonhoeffer stood against the wall and he said to the soldier next to him, do your duty. He shot him dead. Do your duty. Wow. Oh, but they were New Testament Christians. They knew Jesus. These boys didn't know Jesus. But they knew their God, who was Jesus. Before Abraham, I already am. That's what Jesus said. All right, that's chapter 3. Now that we have the knowledge and awareness that there is God and there is every other nonsense in the world, let's watch what happens to Daniel. Remember Daniel? We haven't heard much about Daniel yet, even though it's his book. But he wrote it, so he is setting up perhaps what might be evidences of why he believes and how he came to his faith. We're going to talk a little bit about that in the sermon today. In the Tom Chanter's Back to Basics sermon series. Today is the second step. Clever little booger, that Chanter.